welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained.
Chris Lee. I typically start off my podcast listing a bunch of the cool shit that the people I get to talk to have done or are doing. And as I was thinking about the opportunity to talk to you today, I was struggling with coming up with anything about you. So I figured I would just start with telling a story.
Okay.
a little over a year ago, our good friend Gina Kazaza asked me if I would be willing to go on her podcast, which is the shirt that I'm wearing right now, Mindset Lessons in the Field. So I was stoked because I was familiar with her podcast and who she talked to, which is special operators, exceptional individuals that have done amazing things, primarily in the military and within special operations. But so I was honored just to even be considered because that is not my community. I, of course, as you know, am in the Navy and do some cool things, but not amongst the typical people she talks to. And I was familiar with who she had talked to in the past, not all of the episodes. And I asked her, are there certain episodes that you would have me listen to just to better prepare? And right away, she was like, absolutely, Chris Lee. No hesitation. And when you think of the names that she had talked to in like the 50 some odd episodes she had done before, that's a high compliment in and of itself. So I listened to her advice, and she had you on 3 times already, which is also the most she's ever had anyone on. And I went back to that first episode, loved the first one, was laughing, learning, liked you immediately. And so we were talking about how awesome it was, and I got an idea of her interview style, but I was already hooked. So I listened to that second episode, and like 10 minutes in, I was like, screw this, stopped, ordered the book that's sitting behind me beyond the house as I continued to listen to the podcast through the third one. But reading this book, which as soon as I opened the first page, your introduction, which is hilarious in and of itself, your book's full of humor, so it had me cracking and laughing out loud. But more importantly, like in the realm of self-improvement books, which I've read many to gather insights for leading and coaching on my own, but also just for my own self-improvement, I like, while it does fall in that category, I would call this like a self-fulfillment book. And what you do so well in it, and then when you talk on podcasts and in everything you're doing with machine mentality these days, is you explain the why in a very practical and concise way better than most I've ever seen. So you see books either say like what to do or get very philosophical about the concepts. You take the why and then you give open-ended explanations as to how. You don't prescribe anything. You give ideas on how you can pursue it in very concrete ways, but you allow the person to decide. And it was at the end of that book that I found this QR code. So it was an opportunity to talk to you for 15 minutes for free. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm jumping right on that. So we linked up, and I think that conversation ended up being more like an hour. And then I got integrated with your team and top tier performance. And my goodness, I've gotten to know you now over the past year. And every minute I get to spend with you is value add for me. And it's an honor to get to talk to you today, brother.
Dude, what a great intro, man. I'm humbled. Thank you. No, I'm so stoked that you reached out and booked that call initially. And you're right, that first call is scheduled for 15 minutes turned into an hour because the conversation just flowed so well. And I'm grateful for you for reaching out. So yeah, I'm thankful for you having me on your show. Man, I am stoked about this conversation. So it's always a great time to chat with you for sure.
I'd like to think I contributed a little bit to that conversation, which turned into another before I joined your team with Top Tier Performance. But then I got to talk to a bunch of the amazing individuals as part of your team and realize you have this unique way of bringing insights out of people, wisdom that they have already or that they're interested in exploring without, again, prescribing anything. You have a very good collaborative method with people. Like an ideal coach doesn't tell you what to do. They encourage you to figure out what to do and can give you some rudder steer if need be when you're struggling. And what blew my mind as we talked more, that QR code, which that book has been read by thousands of people, if not more than that. I don't know the exact number. It doesn't matter. It's been read by so many people, but you told me it's less than 5, I believe, that have taken advantage of hitting that QR code just to get the chance to talk to you for 15 minutes and see where it goes. That's wild to me.
So it's available, but people have to make the choice, and they can choose not to book a call with me for a number of reasons. But 15 minutes won't kill you. And in our situation, man, like we turned out to be good friends as a result. So like, yeah, I welcome people to take advantage of that QR code in the book for sure.
The power of choice. And that comes across quite a bit in your book when it comes to personal accountability. Really, all of life boils down to choice and the choices we make or do not make for the reasons that we're aware of or not because we think we don't have the bandwidth to consider it and just fulfill obligations or have reasons to not act on things that might be an opportunity. And man, some of these things that come up in our lives when it really is just shooting your shot and seeing where it goes, not certain of what the outcome will be, not even tying yourself to an outcome. That was one of the themes that ran through your book quite a bit in the different domains that you talk about. While you give personal stories as you were a Green Beret for 10 years, specializing as a combat medic. I always love hearing about personal stories and origin stories, which comes across in your podcast, definitely in your book, both the wins, but really the struggles as well, your lessons from it, and then the philosophy you've derived from it. I'm interested, since you've written that book, which came out in 2024, and you even alluded to it in your intro, how has your philosophy from this book evolved with all of the other things that you're doing now?
Excellent question. Admittedly, I've kind of caught the bug, and I'm working on two more books that will be, I guess, sequels to Beyond the Battlefield. And and as I'm kind of formulating, outlining, beginning chapters, I'm trying really hard to create a common thread that will run through all the books. And I'll give you a little bit of maybe a highlight reel. So Beyond the Battlefield is essentially my philosophy in how to structure one's life with some intentionality behind it. So it's like figuring out who you want to be and then attaching goals to that identity and then building that through a process of like getting real specific with your long-term goals, backwards planning, knowing exactly what your daily steps are. So that's essentially the build phase. Book number two um, will be called Beyond the Serpent, and it references, and I mentioned it in the first book a little bit, but the Ouroboros, which is the snake that's eating its own tail, and the interpretation that I found regarding that symbol that I really liked was as the serpent devours the portions of itself that are no longer necessary, that's what gives it the nourishment and strength to grow and become better. And so the second book is going to be all about eliminating the unnecessary. And there's a couple ways to kind of approach that, I think. The one is like you walk out into your garage and look at everything that has dust on it and then have a yard sale, right? Because you obviously haven't used it in a while. Go ahead and get rid of it. That's one portion of this elimination process. But I think the more important and often more difficult is letting go of some of the lies and illusions that we've begin to latch onto as we've grown into adulthood, right? And some of that might include stories that we were told when we were children about ourselves, or somehow we just happened to adopt, and that has shaped the trajectory of our life, good or bad, right? Some of it is letting go of uh, needing to perform in order to feel of value. Letting go of that because I think that's what actually leads to burnout is like I can never stop because if I stop, I'm no longer valuable to anybody and no one will love me. Letting go of that falsehood and that illusion, and rather digging back into that identity, and everything that you do is actually an expression of who you are. And so there is no burnout because everything you do is with excellence and with intentionality, but coming from a place of like who you are regardless of outcome, right? And so that's kind of the theme for the second one. And then the third book, Beyond the Self, is essentially it's going to document a little bit of my journey from throughout my life, particularly transitioning from the first book to the third book. When I wrote the first book, I was a non-believer, and through some circumstances that I'm grateful for, I came back to the flock and consider myself a believer now. And it'll document a little bit of that transition, but then like, what do I do with that? And so focusing on more than just like establishing my own journey and following through on like the life that I want to build, but also like when I get to a point, be able to turn around on my journey and then help other people along their journey as well. So like beyond me, beyond just my own ecosystem, but rather like helping a community of some to some capacity. So that's going to be kind of like the thread that's going to run through the trilogy. And my hope is once you finish the third book, you have become a new person, at which point you can then start the first book over again and begin the process anew. And it creates that kind of cyclical nature to life that we all kind of experience. So,
Man, now you got me excited. So I have something to bug you about hurrying up with 2 and 3. Do you have any ETAs on either one of those books yet?
my I had high hopes to have it wrapped up by Q1 of this year. And I realized, and I had probably 10,000 words on paper that I'm like, all right, this is looking pretty good. And then as I continue to explore the theme within the second book, I'm like, I might have to scrap most of this. It's not a complete back to the drawing board, but pretty damn close. So all that to say, like, this one's going to take a minute. My hope is by the end of this year, it is out on Amazon, like the first one.
Authors I talk to, particularly of outstanding books that are near and dear to my heart, including you. I rarely hear that they accomplish these books based on the initial timelines they set for themselves. So, like,
Right.
because you had these aspirations and these great goals initially, but then your heart and soul go into these pages like it did with this first book. And then when you start editing and you keep, like, you just gave an amazing summary of the second book, which I want to talk about more here in a moment. But the more that
Yeah.
you dig into it and you want to be sure it meets exactly what that initial goal was, of course, it's going to take some revising, some editing, and maybe throwing it out the window and then doing it again. And a lot
Right.
of the times, like in my past, whether it's projects for school or work, or of course, individual hobbies I'm pursuing, your first time through is a great trial run. But like, even if it's good enough, if you have those high standards for yourself and you know you have more in the tank, I hate redoing things, but at the same time, delay gratification wise, when I redo them and I see how much better it is, remember
Yeah.
that, Kyle. Like, do it again because it's going to be that much better. You learn so much through experience. And what you said about your second book, I love, as you know, I've been a stress management resilience instructor in the Navy now for over 10 years. And one of my favorite things to talk about is stress versus stressors, and then looking at each one for what we can control and not within each. And when we talk about stressors, some are needed in our life, and they're inevitable and you can't get rid of them. But one thing we forget about, rather than just managing everything on our plate, is like, does it need to be on our plate? Do we need to keep it with us? Removing unnecessary stressors and the subsequent stress that they can cause. And it could be those very straightforward things like clean out your garage and your closet and all these things that are no longer adding value to what you're working on. But what resonated with me, and we've talked about this a few times, is what we carry through our past experience, which may no longer align with our identity and who we are today. It definitely shaped who we are, and we can be thankful for part of it, but we don't need to keep
Sure.
carrying that same weight. And childhood is a big one. And we've talked about, I mean, you've done so many incredible things, both in your service and beyond it. And one cool thing you've done is you've helped facilitate psychedelic experiences for service members and other individuals. And we've
Mhm.
talked about this and other guys that I've talked to where you've seen some shit and you've lost some important people in your life as well as many others. And time again, when I talk to these individuals, more often than not, these experiences don't draw off the burdens that they're carrying from their service and the what most people would call traumatic experiences there. And don't get me wrong, some people struggle with that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But more often than not, when I talk to these guys, it's what they're carrying from their childhood and wrestling with that and dealing with that and removing that. Um, yeah, that's going to be really interesting to read about.
For sure. And admittedly, yes, some of my psychedelic experiences, both on the support side and my personal journey with them, some of those insights are for sure going to be in the second and third book. And man, to your point, yeah, the some of the journeys I've done on my own, it's like it's like storm and chaos because you're almost like able to visualize the subconscious as you're in your journey, right? But I remember one journey in particular, it man, it kinda, like, guided me through all this, like, chaos storm, and it plopped me right in front of when my mom died when I was like 6. And I was like, well, this sucks. I don't want this. Can we do something different? And the medicine was like, nah, you kind of got to sit here for a minute and just like look at it. And it was interesting, and you kind of brought it up, like a lot of the junk that I happen to have been carrying was from childhood, not necessarily stuff that I experienced anywhere else, really. And that particular wound was interesting because it was a common theme in a number of my journeys. And it's like, well, how do I navigate that? And for that journey in particular, I remember like eventually just letting all that junk out, like weeping in my bed alone. And I was like, all right, well, the wound is there. Now what do I do? How do I heal it? And it was like, dude, you can't unwound yourself. It's like it happened. What you can take away from it now is understanding that that wound was influencing very subtly almost all the decisions you've made throughout your life, to in particularly how I interact with people, often keeping them at arm's length because I knew they were going to leave at some point, right? And so it's stuff like psychedelics. They don't fix the problem. They showcase what the problem might be, and then you get to figure out how to navigate through that. And for me, in that case in particular, it was I now get to detach. Oops, excuse me. I get to detach and step back and look at the situation and say, oh, I see that particular wound was influencing decisions, and I I don't have to let it influence decisions anymore. I can like look at it. It doesn't take away necessarily the wound itself, but it showcases that I can detach and look at the wound from a different perspective, which is I don't have to let it influence me anymore. If that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. And you kind of answered the question I was going to ask as you kept talking and said it so well. Because as psychedelics become more mainstream and you see big research institutions get behind them and then become more promoted for potential medicinal purposes underneath the guidance of experts like yourself and other individuals, well, this isn't just something that's recreational. This is something that can offer real value. A lot of people get things wrong or have these assumptions about what they are and what they are not. And as you mentioned, they don't replace the work with dealing with the wound. They
Right.
illuminate the problem. And I
Yeah.
know for sure for me and probably for most, I suck at solving problems I'm not aware of. And I might know I had a
Right.
hard past, but if I'm not sure
Yeah.
of how they've influenced my beliefs and my predictions and my reactions to everything else, if I don't really illuminate and define that problem within my own operating system, I'm gonna have a very hard time doing the work to manage it, detach from it, reframe it, and leverage it for my function so I can find a way to perform despite that happening, which you can't control anymore.
Right. Right. An excellent point. The integration is what it's often referred to, but like the work after the experience, right? That is always the most important part. Otherwise, every time you do a journey, you're going to have to try to relearn the same lesson over and over again. It isn't until after the work has been done following the experience that then you have opportunity to like explore some other things that might be going on. But it's interesting for sure, because like you said, man, I like I don't know what I don't know, and so if I don't know what the problem is, or I don't know if there is a problem, I don't know how to address it, or at least navigate it well. Sometimes that stuff, it's like there's not much you can do about it. Mom died, like it happened. What I can do now about it is recognize it that it was a wound for sure. And it has impacted me. But I now get to choose because I can recognize like, okay, I don't have to let the wound influence me every day, all the time. You know what I mean?
Mhm. And I know this is the third book, and don't want to get too far ahead of yourself as you redo the second book altogether in some of the ways that we're talking about right now. But
Yeah.
getting beyond the self, how did the work that you're working to accomplish in the second book contribute to becoming a believer, or even just the concept of beyond yourself? If that's not something you want to go into yet.
Yeah, great question. All right, so full disclosure, man. So before the army, I was a youth pastor, and man, the best job in the world. I wasn't great at preaching, but I was awesome at throwing dodgeballs at teenagers, and I did that with vigor. I just middle schoolers, I would just right in the face with what the old school like rubber dodgeballs. Man, it was awesome. Best job in the world. Amidst that period of my life, I began to ask questions. Oh, still there. I began to ask questions that, theologically speaking, that I couldn't quite get an answer that I was satisfied with. To the point where I was like, I'm not sure I believe in this anymore. I should probably resign because that's a bit of a prerequisite to work on staff at a church. It was from there that at that time, I considered myself an atheist, and I joined the military, did 10 years there, and after the fact, after I got out, I got introduced to psychedelics and some of those modalities and medicines. And I was doing a journey here in my bedroom by myself, and it got real dark real quick. And what I mean by that is like I felt like I was under attack. And when I was on the teams and we would be working like CQB, like clearing houses and stuff, I was taught that, you dig your corner and you run into something that you need some help with. Your immediate response is to yell support, because that lets everybody in the room know that you're dealing with something and to come help when their job is done in that particular room, right? And I remember laying in my bed, feeling as though I'm being attacked by an enemy of some sort, surrounded. And my prayer back to God was support. That was it. Support. And he showed up immediately, and almost instantaneously, like the threat was at the very least pushed back. I had like a cordon around me, and I was safe. I was like, hey God, it's been a while, but obviously you're real. Let's hang out. And that's kind of been the beginning of my journey back to faith. Now, in regards to the second book, the concept of the Ouroboros, I had heard a number of years ago, by the author Jack Donovan. He actually gave a talk. I saw it on YouTube or something. Speaking of the Ouroboros, and that's where he kind of described his interpretation of the devouring process. But as I continue kind of my faith journey, and then also this concept of the serpent devouring that which is unnecessary. I mean, not everybody's going to like the analogy of the serpent, and that's fine. You don't have to use it. You can. There's some other images that come to mind too, like a refiner's fire, burning away the impurities that don't belong. So all that is left is the good metal, right? I mean, it's the same thing. And so in regards to, I mean, my filter's still pretty loose. I'll still drop F-bombs, and you'll probably see some of those in the next book too. But so forgive me. But, but I would argue that there's going to be a pretty significant difference in the language and tone in which I write these next couple of books. And I was even thinking, because as you know, in the first book, I break life down into multiple areas like mental, physical, emotional, social, financial. If and when I do like a second edition of the first book, I'll add a spiritual component to that, because I think it's so vital. So it's definitely, my faith journey is definitely shaping not only like kind of philosophy that I'm trying to develop within this trilogy, but also how I interact with my team and stuff on group calls and that type of thing, for sure.
I love it. And I love to hear you're going to stay silly, because you also do such a good job of the dichotomy between making light of situations and adding in humor, but then getting serious when you need to get serious. And it does sound like you're going to take the more serious tone as you work into, which when you're really exploring yourself and you're being genuine, whether it's through the use of tools that we have in this life or not. But if you're trying to reflect deeply on your past experience, current experience, and what's possible in the future, it's probably time to remove being silly. So when you start getting spiritual, which it's funny, in your book, in those domains that you talk about, that was one thing I noticed, because when I typically talk about resilience, and we can classify things different ways, and we're probably saying the same thing in different buckets. I typically don't talk about finance, but I love the
Mhm.
way that you did it in that book. The reason I don't talk about finance is, one, I'm not that smart in that realm. I've had a lot of great mentors and coaches, so I've been able to include practices in my own life. But I often believe money is a means to fulfilling the other buckets. But at the same time, if you don't have enough money to survive and fill those other buckets, then that's a real challenge. So if we're talking resilience, if you don't have financial resilience considered, it can be a big limitation and liability. So the way you write about that there, it's why I've bought in this book for several friends of mine, because at least one of those buckets I'm aware of, they can benefit from, and I bring it up. But the mental, the physical, the social are the three that I talk about. I like how you split out emotional so you can get into emotional intelligence. But then
Mhm.
the fourth one I usually add in is spiritual. And there's a lot of different
Yeah.
ways to look at spiritual. And it's really cool to hear about your journey and how you are now building upon that, which is really the base of everything else and how we operate, regardless of your belief system. Belief in a higher power and however you define that power, to each his own. But if you don't have that base and strong belief behind it, it's going to be very hard to answer those why questions. And exploring that requires some serious attention.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And again, that's going to be the heavy influence in regards to the third book, beyond the self, beyond me. What's my responsibility? What's my role in regards to community? Now, I do talk about tribe in the first book, but it'll dig a little bit deeper, and how one views the other. We were actually talking about this yesterday on a group call, but um, something I talk about and mention within my group is that there are no groups of people. Like sometimes particularly like with media in general, there's this like attempt at classifying folks into like an us and them. Uh, and I just think that's bullshit. So like there are no groups of people. There are individuals that are doing life for the first time too. And do I agree with all of them? No. But that doesn't mean I can't interact with them in a loving way that I think reflects my faith. And regardless of kind of what their belief systems are, whether I agree with them or not, I can still view the other as an individual created by God, and interact with them as such. You know what I mean?
Beautiful. Couldn't agree more. I love that. And a silly consideration, if people are really getting upset about the Ouroboros, we could use AI to have you eating your own leg as an example of Ouroboros instead. So that could be a cool cover if you're getting
Yeah.
a rejection on the one you come up with.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think you may know the quote on the back of this shirt that I have. Gina Gina used to send out T-shirts to every guest that she had, but as she got into the nonprofit realm, and she has her cool company now that is getting books and the love of reading in different schools, and Power Lit is what it's called. She's really focusing on all financial efforts to support that nonprofit. So she doesn't want to, understandably so. She's in the red on the podcast anyway, like a lot of us are. We just do it because we love it. So she stopped making T-shirts after your episode. So after my episode, she was like, "Actually, I can send you. I'll go ahead and turn around for people that are watching it." The quote came up
Look good naked,
from
be hard to kill.
exactly. Look good naked and be hard to kill, which is comes up in this first book as well. And this is one of your ways that you're being serious but silly when it came to that goal at the time. I'm curious, one, for those that didn't hear the podcast or where you've talked about in the past, what did you mean at that time, and has that evolved in any way?
Yeah, the so in the first book, I talk about like the various areas of life. In the physical category, like ultimately what is the identity that I'm striving for? Who am I in the physical realm, and what goals then will I attach to it? And the identity that I'm striving for is, yeah, look good naked, be hard to kill. Because I ultimately, I think that covers most of your bases. And you can interpret that in a multitude of ways, but like when you look in the mirror, and you can tell if you're out of shape or not, after you hop out of the shower and you're looking in the bathroom mirror, it's like, "Meh, I got some work to do in that particular area." And not from a vanities standpoint, but rather like I read a quote while back, and it was something along the lines of like, you should have 3 hobbies. One that keeps you creative, one that makes you money, and one that sharpens the mind, or something along those lines. And um, there was a period where the creative aspect of a hobby was my work in the gym. Is like I tried to view my body, my physical nature as like, all right, a piece of art that just takes a long time to carve out. If if I want to be stronger in my upper body region or my legs or something, like it takes effort and it takes intentionality to move towards that goal. So some of it is like, yeah, do I look like I'm in shape? Yes. Now the hard to kill part is the more like the functionality behind it. Is awesome if I can lift a ton of weight, but if I can't move, if I'm not mobile, it doesn't help me. And so it's like, all right, how do I incorporate things like yoga or just good foam rolling to ensure that I maintain mobility? Because part of the goal that is attached to that identity that I'm striving for is to be able to outperform my grandkids. I don't have grandkids. They're not going to be around hopefully for a long time. Um, but like I want to be the 60-year-old dude that's like out sprinting them, out jumping them, outperforming them because I've made the choice to take care of this physical body that I'm operating. You know what I mean? And so in regards to like how has it changed? I did a fun thought experiment not too long ago, which is if I was the last person on earth, nobody else was around, what would I fill my day with? And probably after I spent some time just like exploring and I don't know, smashing cars with sledgehammers just for fun. Like after that period was over, uh, the thing that came to mind was like, all right, mind, body, spirit. Those are the things I would focus on because like I got nobody else to impress or nobody else to interact with. Let's focus on taking care of my mind, reading, keeping my mental faculties sharp, taking care of my body, ensuring that I'm able to survive the post-apocalyptic world that I happen to find myself in, and spirit. Like I'm the only one here, so like whatever I can give back to God, let's do that. And what would that look like in that capacity? And so I know this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but as a result of that, like, all right, what does that mean? And how do I incorporate the Ouroboros into that? And some of it was like, well, all right, how do I operate and how do I sculpt the body in a way that is like essentially minimalist? And I wound up selling my home gym almost as like a thought experiment and focusing pretty heavily on just calisthenics, pull-ups, dips. I did keep like a kettlebell and some dumbbells and stuff like that. But like, what can I achieve with like the bare bones? And so far, I I can still maintain. It takes more reps to do for push-ups as opposed to like doing like heavy weight and stuff like that. But you can still achieve a great deal. Which then ties back to like, how do I give back to others or beyond the self? It's like you don't need a gym. Like you can do some push-ups, and I'm trying to prove it through my own workout regimen now. So there's a bit of a
I have no
long-winded answer.
and an awesome one because this quote is both hilarious and powerful. It's very memorable, which is why it's such a great quote when it comes to your identity. But then, of course, you can explain it. I get a lot of fun looks when I'm out, particularly with the family or whatever. Like, what's this dad wearing? But I'll explain it to people, or I'll just enjoy the looks when I get it. But I have no doubt one day that you'll be a great grandfather and still blasting your great grandchildren in the face with rubber
That's
dodgeballs
right.
when you guys are playing.
That's right.
Like that good enough training is actually I had a great conversation recently about that. So like we love gains, we love PRs, and we love thinking about these adaptations and trying to get elite in those areas. And there's a place for that, particularly if you're paid to do so as an athlete, or that's a metric that's important in whatever realm you're operating in. But for most of us that are trying to be as functional as possible across domains and time, worrying about metrics beyond a certain point becomes a limiting factor. It might become unnecessary stress in the first place and limit your capacity elsewhere. So you can often do a lot more with less. And the way you just explained that, I really appreciate because it aligns with that quite well. Like we can get in a lot with very little. And then for the reasons that we're doing in the first place, considering that, is it to give back to your family, to your community, to your job, to God. And that why behind it adds power to it no matter what you're doing. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
We also had a great conversation This was several months ago now when it was still top tier performance before you transition over machine mentality, which I'm excited to talk to you about that as well. But we were talking about that quote. I asked you a question similar to what I just did, but framed it through in this book. You have a great personal story about the skill of calm. And you've told that on Gina's podcast. I'll link to those podcasts too so people can see them in this one. So you don't need to retell that one. Very powerful story and very great demonstration of that skill in a high stress environment. But as I've seen, or as I've known you the past year and hear how you've evolved, thinking about calm versus peace and how that relates to being hard to kill and differentiating those two aspects. How are you viewing that in your life right now?
Yeah, great question, man. Yeah, this idea of peace, actually, it's the introduction. You mentioned the introduction to the first book. The introduction to the second book is as follows: peace comes with less. Full stop. And peace is one of those things where I, I I don't want all of my stories to be like, all right, this one time I was on mushrooms, but I happened to be on mushrooms this one time. And amidst that journey, I was like, dude, I want peace. I want to strive for peace. I'm chasing after, I'm like actually saying this in my head. And God or the universe or what, however you want to word it, was like, no, you idiot. Stop striving. Just be peace. And I was like, oh, and it was like this kind of aha moment that peace is not found on some like distant mountaintop that I have to go chase after and climb. It is actually buried beneath all the bullshit that I've piled on top of it, amidst my life and all the baggage that I happen to be carrying with me. And so peace is actually an excavation process. It is like the elimination of all the junk, all the unnecessary, and it is actually the foundation that you get to rest on, to navigate life with, but it requires excavation. And so, to kind of differentiate between calm and peace, I'm not entirely sure how to articulate it, but maybe one way would be like peace is the state. Practicing calm is the repetitions that one takes to kind of excavate, and that comes a lot through like meditation and man, to be honest, like even techniques that we learned during SEER school, which is like when you have a stimulus that elicits some kind of response from you, you get to create a little bit of space between the stimulus and the response, through things as simple as pausing, breathing, thinking, and then responding. And even just that fraction of a moment can create enough of a buffer between the thing and me that I don't have to respond in a reactive way. I don't have to respond from emotion. I can feel the emotion, but the emotion doesn't dictate how I operate, right? And that is something I do try to reiterate with my group a lot, which is emotions are important. They're data points on what's going on in the environment, that something is happening, and this is how your mind is responding to it. Now, so it's important to recognize, observe those emotions, but they don't get to call the shots. And so creating that little bit of space between stimulus and response allows for calm to take over. And I tell my folks often that you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. And so if the first time you were trying to practice that pause, breathe, think, respond, if the first time you're trying to practice that is in an emotional, tumultuous situation, you're not going to do well. And so the practice I recommend is like, dude, practice it a lot. Like practice it in situations that aren't very emotional. Just get in the habit of getting those repetitions in often, because then when you do need it, you have the repetitions under your belt. Now, in regards to the story you mentioned in the book, I was thinking about this notion of calm, particularly amidst kind of stressful situations. And I think it comes from like clarity and confidence. And what I mean by that is like in a particular situation, like maybe you roll up on like a car accident or something like that. Clarity is knowing what the essential desired end state will be. Now, the confidence comes from a great deal of repetitions that you happen to have gotten under your belt. In my case, I was a medic in the schoolhouse I went to. Like it was trauma heavy, and so like I had a lot of repetitions on incredibly high stress situations dealing with trauma, and that's where the confidence came in. I had so many repetitions that like the story in the book, it was a training exercise of a mass cow, and it's like they just kept bringing in bodies, and me and the PJ I was working with had to assess and then treat and then keep going around the circle. But we stayed calm because we both knew exactly what to do. We had a very particular sequence that we followed, and we had done so many repetitions. It was just like, all right, let's just do the next one. And so like, well, how then do you plan for crazy situations or chaos to show up? Like, it depends. Like if you're trying to be a medic on a situation that you roll up on, it's like you got to get the repetitions in. So like sign up for a class, go be an EMT, like get those reps in. But in other situations, like maybe you just want to handle stressful situations in your home better. Well, you have to get the repetitions in. You have to be able to create that pause in between stimulus and response. So when your kids are yelling at you or your wife is yelling at you, you don't escalate. You can like, okay, I hear what you're saying. It sounds like you're pretty frustrated in this situation. All right, this is the proposed solution. Dude, game changer, but you got to get the reps in. So it's like, it's clarity and confidence. And confidence only happens when you've done the training.
Hell yeah. And if I were squared away, I would have taken notes on our conversation when we had that several months ago. But what your explanation, particularly of peace, has clearly even evolved since then, which is so cool. Continuously learning, continuously thinking and reflecting and building upon the great foundation you have. And what I recall, without having taken notes from that powerful conversation that we all had together, it wasn't just me and you, but the whole team with top tier performance. I had something in my mind about calm is a trainable skill, resulting from repetitions, whereas peace is more of a spiritual state. And some of the explanations you gave today built upon that quite a bit, where like calm is of the mind more so, and peace is
Yeah.
more of the soul. And
Yeah.
hearing the book plans that you have now and moving toward the excavation process where the work is not responding and it's part of that. Of course, calm will influence peace and vice versa. They can pair together, but it's very important to delineate those two things because they're not one and the same. And working toward a state of peace will allow you to be more calm and focus your efforts on what matters most to you in those domains. And what I appreciate what you just said too is like I love hard physical training to train the skill that is resilience, where all the byproducts of getting stronger, faster, whatever, fantastic. That's secondary due to my lesson of being able to do hard things on purpose and get more comfortable being uncomfortable. But if I'm just using that to get better in my marriage, I'm gonna struggle still in the hard conversations if I'm avoiding all those reps and then when they come up and I'm just reactive to it. The mindset can be derived in certain domains of like, oh yeah, I can do really hard things. Now I need to do those really hard things in those areas that are important to me and get those reps so I can have the particular skill sets in that area. And you just explained that really concisely and really well when it comes to things like parenting or your relationships, or of course your job, your profession, your life in general, whatever matters to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I've realized is like the journey is never done. Like I want to learn always, and that's going to require continued excavation always. And so, yeah, my thoughts on peace and calm have definitely evolved, and hopefully for the better, because they're going to be in the next book. So,
Well, as I said, I can't wait to read it. So I've mentioned
awesome.
a few times already. You've recently joined forces with Nick Lavery,
Mhm.
and he has several companies, of course, and Machine Mentality, which you are now the founder and leader of within Nick Lavery's system, where they have machine strength, machine vitality, which are two really cool areas, of course,
Mhm.
to enhance strength, to get all kinds of blood work and ideas about what's going on in your body to optimize your vitality. And then with you, my favorite area, of course, mentality and evolving your mental resilience to perform in life in any domain. How has that transition been? What are you focusing on here? And in relation to the work under machine mentality, you talk about resilience quite a bit. I'd love to hear kind of like where you are with resilience, what your definition of it, and how you're using it in your teams.
Sure. Yeah. It was, dude, Nick is the man. I love that guy so much. And when he approached me to be a part of his ecosystem, I was pretty stoked. And so I'm grateful for him for bringing me on board. It's been a blast. And he is great at surrounding him with really awesome people, which made me wonder why he brought me on, because I'm like, dude, all these people around me are studs. But I'm grateful to be a part of the journey. So so the transition, I signed paperwork officially, I think back in maybe October or November. And it was interesting for sure because being essentially a solopreneur, you're super fast and agile. Like you can pivot hard at the drop of a hat. Now being part of a team and then also a greater ecosystem, the machine's a little bit slower. And that took some getting used to on my part. But man, I am so grateful to have like the support around me. I'm not in this alone anymore, which is incredible. I have people I can call on um, to ask for advice or bounce ideas off of. And when you get a bunch of people like in the same room or on a Zoom call, and you get to discuss ideas on like the potential that something has, man, it fires me up. So I am absolutely grateful for that this transition period. Now, in regards to like structure of things, it's actually relatively similar to what I was doing before. In top tier performance, we would do group calls 3 times a week. We're still doing those, and I'm grateful for the folks that have kind of hung out with me for the past number of years. Um, and we actually had one earlier this morning. The conversations, I would argue, have just gotten better, and primarily because we have legitimately become a tribe, and culture is starting to shape and form and ooze into the conversation, and it's awesome. And I I no longer consider myself like a teacher really in these calls. What I do is Mondays and Thursdays I typically have like a thought that I've been wrestling with, and now I'll present it. It's unrefined, and I kind of slap it in front of the council, as I call them, and then I let them just like pounce on it and like tear it apart and like find the weak spots, and then they deliver it back to me from their perspective. I'm like, ah, well said. You're so smart, and so it's become like this really fun dialogue where I don't do a whole lot of teaching. I present a thought that I've been kind of wrestling with, and then now we all get to discuss together. And man, it is such a blast. And then Saturdays are tons of fun too, with just free for all Q&A, and those are great because it forces me to kind of think on my feet. And somebody drops a question, and some of them are like super silly questions, and some of them are just like deep, and I'm like, dang, okay, let me think through this. And then we all get to wrestle with this particular circumstance or this particular question. We all get to wrestle with it together in real time. And man, it is just so much fun. I just love it. So I'm grateful for the folks in that community, for participating in that process with me.
And I completely agree with you because I've been fortunate enough to be on many of those calls. It's been a little while, unfortunately, as you know, life circumstance and the times that they happen have prevented that. But man, I've been part of many teams. I've pursued groups similar to yours just to learn myself, share, facilitate some of my own, and brainstorm with others in specific areas, particularly self improvement, and just
Yeah.
seeing what people are struggling with. And your ability to facilitate a conversation is unlike any other I've experienced. And I love how it's honest and like the
Yeah.
formatting you have for the discussions, but you also said it like you're pretty cool yourself. I think we're showing that in this conversation, and hopefully people that read your book will see even more so or listen to some of your other podcasts and the books that you have coming out. But man, you have some incredible individuals, different ages, different backgrounds, different
Yeah.
belief systems, but finding that common ground and wrestling with these same concepts that apply universally. Every time I've been able to make one of those calls, again, it's not just your awesome ass; it's everyone else on there that's
Exactly.
contributing. It's so beneficial. It's such a value add, and um, yeah, it's just so cool to hear that's continuing to evolve. And if people are not familiar with Nick Lavery, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he is a living legend. The
Yeah.
story that he has and his continued service after significant injury, he embodies what it is to be of service and of character, because not only has he done all these physically amazing things, but he's done it virtuously. And then you see him still in uniform, finding ways to give back. And of course, he has companies, but he doesn't do this from some superior place or from some place where he's trying to like embrace how much money can. He does this from a place of how can I get amazing individuals together, create these systems to make people better. So continue to serve in multiple capacities, and it's just so cool having known you before that happened, where you were already admiring what he was doing and talking about like this is kind of what I aspire to do, emulate that, and then it's just amazing where life goes when like things happened that you could never forecast, and then to see it happen now, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm so grateful that I get to be a part of that community. And yeah, like I said, Nick is just the man. He's so great. Just he's an absolute behemoth. Like he's a monster. But dude, when you sit down and talk with him, he's like the greatest dude. So I'm grateful for him for sure.
Love it. So, coming back to that question before, I gave you like 5 questions in one. The last one I asked about is one of the focus areas of machine mentality is
Hmm.
resilience. So, how do
Yeah.
you look at resilience and how are you applying that in the different systems that you have within machine mentality?
Yeah. Uh, I think there's a couple different like definitions for resilience. One of the ones that I kind of like is essentially like your ability to bounce back after setback, right? And how quickly one can do that. And a lot of my work stems from like identity, like who are you? And and if one can have a firm grasp on exactly who they are, uh, that bounce back feature gets a little bit easier, I would say. I mentioned before, like this notion of trying to perform to earn worth or earn love from the people around us. But when you flip that and you are operating from your identity, who you are, who you were made as by the creator, like that is a foundation that you can stand on, and it creates some like interesting things in life. And one of them is it makes me a little bit more fearless. Failure doesn't dictate my worth, nor does success. And what I mean by that is like I can truly detach from an outcome as I'm working towards a particular goal or endeavor. Truly detach from the outcome because I'm confident in who I am. And in regards to resilience, it's like, man, when you do hit those setbacks, when you poured a lot of time and energy into a particular goal or whatever it is that you're striving for, and then it doesn't work out, dude, the bounce back, the ability to like say, all right, that sucks, drive on, like that comes from like knowing exactly who you are regardless of outcome. And so when those setbacks happen, and they will, uh, you have the capacity now to say like that doesn't define me. That that setback, that failure, that catastrophic situation that just plopped in my lap, that doesn't define who I am. That is a circumstance that I happen to be navigating as me. And so, in my opinion, like it only fortifies that resilience muscle that we're all trying to train. But the tricky part is reminding people of who they are. Um, and that takes some work. Like I said, it's an excavation process, and that excavation isn't always fun, and it isn't always pain free, and it requires some work, and it requires some like reflection on self and asking good questions. Like, dude, why am I clinging to that particular story, and why have I clung to it for decades? Or another one is, why have I given that particular story so much weight in my life? And when you realize you get to make the choice of how much weight any particular thought or memory has, you get to decide if you're going to take that out of your rucksack and travel a little bit lighter. You know what I mean? And I think that all contributes to one's ability to be resilient throughout life.
I love that analogy. The weighted stories, especially. So the stories
Yeah.
we tell and the impact that they have on how we live now. Like we get to choose how we tell our stories, but we apply weights differently for various reasons. And sometimes when I reflect on why, because it's just become a pattern story that we're used to, it's part of us without realizing we get to define us. We get to define our foundation. And as you said, reminding yourself and reflecting back on who am I? Why am I this way? And how am I using that so I can respond to the inevitable things that'll be plopped on my plate from time to time throughout life. Some impossibly hard to imagine how difficult they'll be can help with that resilience quite a bit. And you mentioned training that muscle, which I love because I do believe it's a skill. It's something that can be trained. And I also know on that fantastic website that is machine as a whole, and then the different components of it, machine mentality. It mentions multi-week intensive challenges. So when it comes to, you and I have talked quite a bit about stress inoculation or
Mhm.
habituating people, particularly in the military, it's known for, where you put people under relatively physically safe conditions, not psychologically safe at all, but make them very stressed out to deal
Yeah.
with tactical challenges, whatever challenges you may imagine, and then get those reps. And the more you do anything, the more comfortable you get with what previously made you uncomfortable. And then you inoculate or you decrease the sensitivity to that stress in that
Mhm.
domain, and that can translate. So training resilience involves inoculating the system to stress in that domain. Are you using that concept in some of these multi-week intensives for the challenges that you have underneath machine mentality?
Y- Yes, but maybe not in quite the way that you pictured. Meditation has become a pretty large portion of my life, this past year, and something I have found, particularly with myself, but with other people I talk to, meditation is not comfortable. Uh, Particularly now that like we've got this supercomputer in our pocket all the time, that we have the option to just be entertained constantly, and meditation is actively choosing to just be still and listen. And what what you're actually listening to are your own thoughts, which can be uncomfortable for some people, and particularly the folks that like. I work with some high achievers, and they're like, dude, I can't meditate. I can't shut my mind up. So I'm just not going to do it. And I'm like, bro, that's kind of like saying you're too dirty to take a shower. Like the whole point is to practice this. You know what I mean? And and so like this meditation concept, and I'm by all means a beginner. But the more I do it, the more I learn about it. You're not actually trying to shut the mind off or stop it from thinking. It's pretty impossible. What you're actually trying to do is step back and just observe the thoughts as they race by. And the more you can practice that observation posture, the more you realize, dude, I'm not my thoughts. Who I am is not the thoughts that are just racing around in my head right now. I kind of like what I said earlier is like, I get to choose what kind of weight I apply and what kind of significance a particular thought has. But I can only do that if I take the time to practice stepping back and observing. Because the more I observe, the more those thoughts kind of start to slow down, and I can start to recognize patterns like, yeah, it's this time of day I get stressed out about emails or whatever. And so like that's the thought process or the thought pattern that happens to present itself. And learning how to step back and just sit in kind of that awareness and watching that stuff like race by, it's like cool. And another thing I recommend to folks, at some point you're going to latch onto one of those thoughts and chase it down the rabbit hole. And in the moment that you realize that you've done that, like pump the brakes, be kind to yourself, bring yourself back to breath or whatever, and then go back into that observation state. Um, Again, working with high achievers, they expect to be awesome at stuff almost immediately. And that's just not how stuff works most of the time, you know? And then particularly with like intentionally just being still and observing and listening, um, that isn't something a lot of people do or value these days. And in my opinion, it is kind of like training that sense of calm. It is getting the reps in, so to speak, of being able to observe those thoughts or those emotions that pop up and not immediately reacting and responding to them. It's like I am creating the space between it and me, you know.
It's ironic that one of the hardest things we can do in the modern world is nothing. And
Right.
we've never had more opportunity to be stimulated and get dopamine hits and remove boredom as soon as possible. And I'm not surprised by your answer for what the multi-week intensives are. I still have a few more years left in the military, but if Nick wants to build up a legal team, I'd be happy to take the physical arm of that branch. We'll build some O courses around the country, and we'll just beat people up physically underneath the multi-week intensives. But make sure we have a lot of lawyers behind us,
I
so
love
we,
it.
we can consider that for later. No, I mean, while the physical domain is great for inoculating yourself to stress, that that skill doesn't easily translate to other life domains. And most of our stressors, thankfully these days, don't require that great fight or flight system that we have, that we evolved from to respond to physical threats. There are, of course, physical safety concerns. There are life or death situations, and that muscle does need to be trained. And you are benefited by training and exercise, of course. The healthier your body is, the healthier your mind is, the more you can show up and live a long life. Yes, most of our stressors these days are not life or death situations or emergencies. All emergencies are stressors, but most stressors are not emergencies. So those skills that you're talking about of maintaining calm, of internal peace, of being able to do nothing, even though we have every option in the world to stimulate our brain and be distracted, that
Mhm.
is really challenging, particularly for individuals that are exceptional, that are elite, or that want to be elite. They want to find the next thing to do to build. And sometimes doing nothing allows you to do more effectively. So that is very cool. And I'm not surprised because we've talked about this a bit and you've talked on some really big podcasts recently, beautifully describing the benefit of meditation as you just did. And that's hard work, but it, we avoid that for a reason. And often the things that we avoid are the biggest opportunities in our lives. So it's very funny. You talk to people like, I'm willing to do all these things except that. Well, that thing's the biggest opportunity. So
Right.
good on you. And it'd be very cool. And of course I will, within Machine Mentality, start exploring some of those challenges and talking about them because as you did in this book, as you did in your subsequent, it's a workbook, but it's also a book and a guided journal with all kinds of ideas, Legacy Forged. So the subsequent book on top of this one, a book in between book two, if you will, has all kinds of ideas for that, requiring you, again, not giving these prompts to think about, not giving this guided meditation, giving open-ended ability to explore yourself and come up with your own answers. And another thing that you said that I really appreciate with meditation is there's many ways to meditate, but it's not nothing. It doesn't need to be guided listening to some stimulus. And I often like to talk about controllables in this world, and
Mm.
thoughts are not within our control. I say
Right.
thought interpretation is within our control. Thoughts come into our head, and then it's how we interpret them and then use them subsequently with our actions, which is the other controllable. And then you can throw out a bunch of other things in that, like beliefs and habits and all that good stuff that come from our thought interpretations and actions. But
Mhm.
your description concisely of meditation, where it's not even interpreting, it's observing and letting them pass. It's just
Mhm.
seeing what comes in, observing, noting, and then sure, there might be interpretation, but there doesn't need to be. And even like removing that aspect of control that I like to talk about there, a worthwhile challenge if I've ever heard one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an adventure for sure, and one of the most difficult things to that I've done is like a consistent meditation practice because it's just uncomfortable sometimes. Particularly, I found, particularly like when you're stressed out about life in general, the mind is for sure racing, and actively choosing to sit, be still, and just observe and not try to act on those thoughts. Man, it is tough. A quick tip, something that I found that was super helpful last summer, is I started this walking meditation in my backyard, and it was great here in Colorado Springs, sun shining. So I'd walk out into my backyard in like shorts and no shirt and just barefoot with my gallon water jug, and I would just start walking laps. And man, when I first started, um, I was trying to I was trying to match my breath to my walking pace. So breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4, and I would get like halfway around the yard, and I was out of breath. Like it wasn't syncing up properly. And then I was like, all right, hold up, Chris. Maybe match your pace to your breathing. Flip it. And as soon as I did that, it immediately slowed my pace way down, and it was perfect. Like things started to sync up, so much so that like uh, I got to the point where it was 72 steps from my back porch, a lap around back to my back porch, and I eventually had to like adjust how I was walking because I was starting to kill the grass in my footprints because I was hitting the same footprint on the same spot. Um, but to that point in regards to matching pace to breath, I think there's a metaphor in there somewhere that at some point I would like to tease out. But ultimately it's like sometimes we were trying to force life to our agenda or force life to our schedule. And oftentimes we need to invert that and like match the rhythm of life that's already kind of playing out, and match our pace to that rhythm. But the other added benefit that I found with the walking meditation is it was enough stimulation for my brain to be walking that it kind of occupied that monkey mind a little bit more, and it actually made it slightly easier to kind of like get into that observer state as thoughts presented themselves, because I think the brain was busy doing something during that process.
And tie into what you're getting at with your trilogy of books with the mind, body, and spirit. I often like to say breathing is one of the bridges that we have between our mind and our body, and ultimately our subconscious and our soul. And like not actually the spirit, but in starting to merge some of those two, where it's an
Mhm.
autonomic function. Obviously, we bring conscious attention to it and we start slowing or modifying how we're inhaling and exhaling. It brings a lot of attention to our internal state. And then it can, of course, regulate your body, activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and do a lot of other cool things. But another thing I like about it, outside of just it applying to the concepts that you're writing about in the coming books, is you add a little intentional challenge to meditation initially, rather than having somebody sit um, cross-legged on the floor in the dark in their basement and do nothing for an hour. That's jumping in the deep end, if you will. Whereas, hey, get some steps in. Think about how can you pair your breath to your steps. That's going to take some reps to make that subconscious, to make that more of a muscle memory where you're not thinking about that initially. So that is going to take some conscious intention. And once you become a little consciously competent, the more you do it, the more you can move into that observer state because it's now a rhythm that you've established. So it's a great way to start doing it. Because I was going to ask you next. You answered my question again that I was going to ask without saying do exactly what Chris does, where actually I might say that now if you're not meditating already, think about what you're doing. But I was going to ask, what is your like meditation practice? So I guess I'll just add on to what you said. Do you have certain time that you try to get in daily, weekly, or how do you go about it for kind of fulfilling that bucket?
Yeah, the best practice that I engaged in was particularly last summer when I was doing that walking meditation, and I don't typically recommend people to like start with an hour. I think that's a lot. It's okay to start small, like 90 seconds. If all you can do is 90 seconds, do it. That's the beginning of the process. But something that I found was when I put when I put meditation on my to-do list, it was often the first thing that got bumped to the bottom when days got busy. And then it's like at night and I'm laying in my bed, I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot to meditate. I'll just do it now. And then I pass out, right? The practice that helped me the most was, all right, Chris, like if you want to be serious about it, like fucking do it, you know. I don't know if I'm allowed to say F bombs here. Sorry.
Oh, you
Um
absolutely fucking are. No problem.
good. Um and so I was like, get serious about it then. And so I would just carve out an hour in the middle of my day. It was like right around lunchtime. And it was like it's just blocked off. And that's when I would do it. And I forced the rest of my day to work around that block of time. And for me, that was most beneficial because it actually became a priority and not just something to put on my to-do list, you know.
And I like to talk about self-care quite a bit as a concept in some of these classes that I do in uniform or in general. And we like to think about self-care as pleasurable activities, and there's nothing wrong with instant gratification and of course rest during waking hours and things that you find fun and pleasurable. But if that's all you're doing when you're not fulfilling your obligations, which I'm not a big fan of that word either, I don't believe obligations exist. We get to do everything. We don't have to do anything. Of course, there's consequences when we don't do some of those things or do some of those things, but that's all up to choice, and it's an opportunity and something to be grateful for. But when it comes to something like prioritizing yourself and how you use that time so you can actually make the most of those quote unquote obligations,
Mhm.
self-care is sometimes pursuing something that you would otherwise avoid or perceive as a little bit challenging to experience delayed gratification from the effort. Those things where you feel like you don't want to do it, but then every time you do it after, you're like, I'm glad I did that. And every time afterwards. And what another thing I like about what you just said. So remember this, kids, meditate twice a day. The time that you prioritize during the day and in bed, because it'll help you fall asleep a lot quicker.
Exactly.
But yeah, prioritizing your self-care, but then making sure that time is valuable for you and most likely a delayed gratification activity in at least one domain of life that you're trying to get better in. And there's all kinds of opportunities for that. And if you're not aware of any, Beyond the Battlefield is a great book to start with for sure. One of my favorite well, accounts on Instagram is yours, but one of my favorite aspects of your account on Instagram is the angry sauna sessions that you do.
Yeah.
You are still, so I haven't seen one in a second, but it might just be because
Yeah.
I'm not on Instagram that often. You're still doing those, right? And tell me about kind of where you came up with that idea, because you ran with that and it gets a lot of traction. It's hilarious. And it's everything about it is awesome.
Yeah, admittedly, I haven't done one in a minute, and to be honest, like, my sauna's been acting a little squirrely. I don't know if I blew a fuse in it or something, but it's not operating properly.
Got
So
too
I gotta
angry.
get that fixed. Yeah, probably because of my angry vibes. But the concept behind the angry sauna thoughts were, when I would do sauna, like, I would typically do, like, 90 minutes or 2 hours. I've got an infrared sauna, so it doesn't get super hot, eh, compared to, like a traditional sauna. I think it maxes at, like, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's enough to get, like, your heart rate going for sure. But
For
my
sure.
thought is, yeah, my thought is, like, towards the end of that particular session, like, the filter's kinda coming off, man. Like, I'm a little irritated because, like, I'm, like, super hot. I'm, like, being cooked, you know, and it's like, what a kind of a fun way to just offer kind of unfiltered thoughts, amidst this. It's physically challenging for sure, but also mentally challenging sitting in a sauna for a minute. And so I was like, dude, this could be kind of fun. It's just like unfiltered Chris Lee, at least a little bit, towards the end of this particular session. And yeah, I've done a couple of those. I definitely want to get back into doing those because they were so much fun. But I gotta get my sauna fixed. Uh,
They are a lot of fun. And I like how you wait until the end, because you're understanding it like you do of anything that you do, where if you're not familiar, red sun at 150 degrees, sit in that for 20 minutes and tell me how you're feeling in 20 minutes. You're going to be uncomfortable in that time. You're going to be sweating. It's hot in there. It's a different way. You get cooked from the inside out. And you're at fault for why I can go much longer than I used to. Because I used to do 30 minutes and think, man, I'm getting after it in my infrared sauna, where I
yeah.
would use that more for recovery. But 30 minutes would often make me feel as uncomfortable as I would in my steam sauna, which I have the cheap Amazon one. I cover the top and sit inside in the fetal position and cook myself there with the humidity, and it hurts in a different way, and I don't last as long. But it's very interesting in there. The thoughts that come, like we talk about meditation, the thoughts that come through your head, and
Yeah.
what you do with those, and how you deal with both the physical discomfort, the breathing, and then what is in your head and how you wrestle with that. And I love the idea of recording some of your thoughts. Or another friend of mine, Sam Alimo, encouraged me to bring in a waterproof notebook and a pen, so I could, because
Yeah.
I would come up with like note ideas for Substack or post ideas or anything else that I would want to journal, but I would always forget them by the time I got out. And so he's like, "Bring a notebook in, idiot." I'm like, "Of course, it's the easiest idea in the world." So yeah, keep those going. It's so cool to
Yeah.
see someone like yourself and the thoughts that come to you, which they're not angry, by the way. But
Yeah.
obviously you're uncomfortable and you're just speaking from the soul as you are quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel angry in the moment, but yeah, some of those thoughts don't always come across as angry.
Well, that shows kind of who you are if you're feeling angry, and that's still how you come across. So it's funny. As you know, I talked to our friend Marcus Aurelius Anderson recently,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
one of your goals for a while was, and I told him this story. So when I released that podcast, it'll come out. But one of your goals when I talked to you was to be the calmest person in the room, and you've often been that many times in your life. And like that was until I met Marcus, and talked about him.
Dude, I tell you what, that guy, yes, everybody go check out his page on Instagram too. He's an absolute stud. I love that guy. But yeah, you're right. That is one of my goals, one of the identities that I strive for. And I thought I was doing pretty good. And then he and I hopped on a call and I was like, bro, I'm literally compared to his state of calm. But man, that guy's so great, super smart, and just cares about people. So yeah, definitely go check out his page too.
You talk about another living legend like we do with Nick Lavery, who has an
Yeah.
incredible story of resilience and overcoming adversity, and then finding a way not only to make themselves better, but make the world better. And the
Yeah.
only reason I released my podcast with him yet is because he's releasing his next book. So he has one that's sitting behind me somewhere, but Acting on Verba, his next book, which is named as a podcast too. So when that's ready for pre-order, I'll release that one. But you will be coming up on that one, and
Awesome.
because I start with that story. And I've also talked about you on my podcast several times before, including the one that I had with our good friend Nadia. And
Yeah.
what was so powerful about that is of another person who not only went through extreme adversity of all kinds in her past life, but is still going through it today.
Hmm.
And not only what would resonate with me on the calls that we would have together with Top Tier Performance, but in that podcast, which I wasn't aware of, is how she talked about you saving her life. And it was just through her connection with you, and as she grappled with potentially her life ending outside of her control with the
Hmm.
diagnosis that she was battling with, but also marriage concerns, financial concerns, all kinds of other things. Many people, including Marcus Aurelius Anderson, who talked about it after he died twice on the surgical table, was paralyzed from the neck down before he was about to deploy. I mean, he struggled, and he's willing to be vulnerable, admit that he contemplated suicide. And then he
Hmm.
felt ashamed because even if he wanted to do it and was willing to take action, he couldn't because he was paralyzed from the neck down.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful when you hear about these extraordinary individuals that are out there inspiring people and doing amazing things in multiple domains. Reflect back on some of the darkest moments in their lives and be honest about what they went through. And Nadia did that. And the simple power of connection with another human being, not only who's willing to help you, but what you do so well is share your own past struggles. And something that's resonated with me, with you, and these people that I talk to is a great way to help others and encourage them to share is to share yourself. And that's something
Hmm.
I've struggled with my whole life. Like I've always been very much an aspiring protector and provider, but I would have this idea of being stoic and not the philosophy of Stoicism, which you have multiple amazing Stoic quotes at the beginning of each chapter and Beyond the Battlefield, but the lowercase s Stoic. So
Hmm.
unemotional, acting like nothing affects me. I'm good to go, even though all this internal turmoil, all of this lack of peace, but I'm trying to appear calm. I'm trying to show up with the appearance of strong. And that is not often what encourages people to seek support. If anything, it does the opposite. And sharing your vulnerabilities and your struggles and what Nadia shared and talking about Marcus, and of course, what you have shared in some of these calls and the stories that you're willing to talk about, there's power in that. And I'd love to hear just kind of more on your experience with sharing your own struggles and how it's led to maybe even helping others unknowingly, even though you were the one that was sharing the hard stuff.
Yeah, yeah, great question, man. But I think you hit it on the head. It's like people aren't going to open up and navigate through their junk unless they feel safe to do so. And one of the ways to do that is to be a real person and share my junk too. Wounds that I've experienced or dealt out. Like things that have happened in my life, and just being real about it. That creates a sensation like, oh, this is a safe place. Like I don't have to put on the little s stoic mask that sometimes that tends to be. I'm a fan of stoicism, but I think sometimes people misinterpret it and it becomes a mask as opposed to a philosophy to live by. And trying to avoid that, and that's what I'm grateful about in regards to my group calls. Is it has just become a place where it's like, dude, we can just kind of be real here. In fact, I begin each call with a like, all right, tell me a win and a challenge for this week. Like, tell me something like you're stoked about, and something like, man, you might be struggling with. And there's no rules on that. It can be as deep or as shallow as you want it to be, but it does a couple things in my opinion. One, it establishes like this culture that, hey, these are real people. They're not just faces on a screen. They have stuff that they're navigating. They are people. That's part of the intent. And the other thing is like, yeah, this is a place where it's like we're going to be real, and it's not always going to be comfortable, and we might not even have all the answers at the end of it, but at the very least, we've supported each other as a tribe. You know what I mean?
And it's funny. That's my so many things about the calls and groups that I've been on with you. I love and are my favorite. But if I had to pick one, it's how you start them and how you facilitate with that exact thing, and you encouraging people to share what's going well right now, but also what are you struggling with? So, bottom line up front, we're all showing our vulnerability. And like you said, sometimes it's a funny thing, sometimes it's whatever, sometimes people go deep. And for what is often hour long calls, you think sometimes like it might be hard to fill that space if you're on the outside, not realizing how it could be done. But more often than not, it, some of those sharing of struggles, particularly, we explore that and we talk and then we start sharing more. And like that part of the call sometimes would encompass most of the call when people were going deep or it turned into other things that we could talk about. The power of sharing your own adversities and then encouraging others, it non-verbally encourages others to do so. Like, and that stays with me because when I try to check in with people and I ask how they're doing, I, I find more often, like, I can do that, sure, but sometimes talking to people surface quickly, but then I start sharing with them. Hey, go figure. They come to me either in that conversation or shortly after, and then they start sharing. And maybe I did that intentionally because I noticed some changes in their behavior. But that
Yeah.
power of like, hey, here's what I have going on, and not even asking for help. It is that you open the door to reciprocation and let them know that you can be trusted because you showed trust in them.
Right. Exactly. And that's kind of the basis of community is you're doing it together and you're in it together. I know. I think it was Sebastian Younger. I may have butchered his name, but he wrote a book regarding tribe, and the concept, and he wasn't a particular fan of it because um, it implies exclusivity of others. As my group has kind of like grown and the culture's begun to like solidify, and I'm kind of okay with that exclusivity, and it's like, yeah, it's going to cost you something to be a part of this community, and I don't necessarily mean monetarily. It's going to cost you your desire to put the mask on and to keep people at arm's length. That you will have to eventually do away with that if you want to stick around. And if you're not interested in doing that, that's okay. We might not be the community for you, and no hard feelings. I wish you the best of luck. Carry on. But that's part of it, man. Like if you want to be part of a tribe that actually gives a shit about each other, you got to start laying down the mask. You got to start breaking down the walls and be real, because that's where one, the people around you know where to support you, but then you also know where to support them when the time comes. And the one of the I think I put it in the first book, but the one of the criteria, or several of the criteria by which you begin to choose your tribe, is they are genuinely stoked when you experience success. They are genuinely surprised when you don't measure up to the standard you've set for yourself, and they are genuinely grieving with you when you experience loss. And all that genuineness is impossible if you're not going to be real with people and take off that mask a little bit and start breaking down those walls.
And another genuine aspect that you've demonstrated in that community is you described like a ladder and how coaches and mentors can act on that ladder. And like
Mhm.
this tribe that you've created and continues to grow might be a top rung for certain people. It might be a middle rung for others. And I've seen you help people transition into different pathways in the military, into different aspects of life, which meant leaving your community. And the genuine like elation you had for them and their success as they took on the next aspect of your life. You show that through your actions. It's not just words. You do it every time. You're encouraging people to whatever that path is that they're on. What do they need to do next, even if it means they're not part of your tribe anymore? In today's day and age, like we think back on our ancestors and the tribal nature to how they operated. And it made a lot of sense, of course, when civilization wasn't yet in existence. But we're now a multi-tribal society. And when you think about like what tribes are you a part of, what aren't you, very similar to identity. And when you talked about before, like if you are solely attached to one identity or to one tribe, there inherently is going to be exclusion when you have that one tribe, and that might be a limiting factor in your life, just like if it's an identity. But there's going to be pros and cons and compromise anywhere. But with exclusion, sometimes there's good nature to that too. If you're trying to exclude the unnecessary stressor that's disturbing your peace on the outside, so where you are in your life, what rung you're on in your respective opportunities for growth and fulfillment, the tribes and the identities that you hold and the why behind them is so important to reflect on. Another thing that you talk about quite a bit in your community.
Yeah. I Dude, the group calls are like my favorite time of the week, because yeah, I get to hang out with my people, and we get to jam on stuff, which is just tons of fun. But yeah, like, ultimately, and when I first started coaching, um, my thought is like, ultimately, I want you to get to the point where you don't need me anymore. I want you to. I've given you all the tools that I have. Use them, please. But then, like, I want to set you back loose into the wild. Go crush the world in a positive way. That's kind of my mentality. Now, the group calls, it's like, for me, it's like, if everything burned to the ground and I didn't have anything, I'd probably still somehow figure out how to do the group calls, because like they're just it's the community. But that also includes that, yeah, there's going to be people that outgrow it, and move on to bigger and better things, and I want that for them. And there's going to be some people that just stick around forever too, and I'm stoked about that. I there's a part of me that's like, I feel like responsible, because like we've been together for so long, responsible for these individuals, but also like, I they're not my people. They're not like, I don't own them. They're not mine. They're not a commodity that I've collected. And so if moving on is what's best for them, dude, yeah. How can I help? Not that I'm trying to kick you out, but like, I want to serve you a little bit more as you go and do amazing things. So I think that's part of it, is like, yes, we're a community, we're a tribe, but we're also all individuals, that are on a journey and doing life. And I just want to be supportive of that in some capacity.
The hallmark of any good coach, the ones that either coach themselves out of a job and or create other coaches who emulate aspects that they gathered from their previous coach and go on to do other great things. And you see that happening with the individuals that I've had the honor of getting to talk to on some of your calls and some of the stories that come from them. It's so cool to see, experience, and continue to hear about. You mentioned one thing with the philosophy of Stoicism and how a lot of people get it wrong, and I couldn't agree more. And one of my favorite things about that philosophy is it removed a lot of the projections of either my judgments onto other people, my expectations. Don't get me wrong, I set expectations, I set boundaries, and I do all those good things, but it removed all of the external noise that was of previous concern. And all like what I've gathered from that philosophy is reflected right back on myself, whether it's
Mhm.
the virtues of courage, wisdom, discipline, and justice. I don't use that to determine it in others. It cuts through me. Like
Right.
what is just in me and my choices of what I'm doing. And I agree with you that is as modern Stoicism becomes more and more popular, and you see this resurgence of that philosophy. As with anything that becomes mainstream, you'll see different use cases of it,
Mhm.
and utilization for me and myself. And only now I love to talk about it, but my application of it is just me trying to be and like aspire to be, but also just be in the way you describe when it comes to that piece through what I control, what those virtues are, and utilizing some of the other concepts that come from it. I'm curious as to what other things that you've gathered from that philosophy that has been beneficial to you. Because obviously, using those quotes, I knew you were a fan of it, but you're a fan of many things. You're not tied to one philosophy. You're not tied to one ideology, and that's really another cool thing about you.
Yeah. Um, I think as I was kind of studying it a while back, the conclusion I came to was there's only a couple things we really have control over in life, and at the time I assumed that it was our thoughts and our actions, um, and and understanding that like truly, it's almost like a stress reliever because like oh I only have two things I need to focus on: my thoughts and my actions. That makes my life pretty easy, actually. As I continue trying to grow and evolve, and you mentioned it earlier, it's like I'm not even sure I have control over my thoughts, and I do have control over how I respond to them, though. And to be honest, it just kind of made my life that much easier. It reduced the amount of things that I had control over by half, and which is kind of awesome. The trick, though, is if if thoughts aren't fully in my control, and all I really have control over is my reaction to them and how much weight I apply to them and how much weight I allow them to carry in my life. That means I have to get real good at observing them, and that takes practice for sure. Um, and then based on that observation process and an eventual interpretation of various thoughts, I get to pick the direction. I get to pick the action that will take place next. You know.
Love it. My last question for you. So you've talked about some of the things that you're doing to stay after it in the physical realm, where you're using a lot of body weight exercises, calisthenics, some kettlebells, and some dumbbells here and there to keep looking good as you can naked. And in the mental realm, obviously, you talked about how you're using different forms of meditation to observe your thoughts and using that not only for yourself, but in some of the cool things you're doing with machine mentality. Socially, of course, you're challenging yourself in multiple ways, either it's in solitude with your meditation, of course, with all the amazing things you're doing now through both Nick Lavery's foundation and everything else that you're doing with podcasts and everything out there. What are you doing to challenge yourself to grow spiritually?
Yeah, bro. Whew. Great question. And the the thing I landed on was surrender more. Um, Guys like us like to be in control of our situation, whatever that looks like. And I realized like, dude, surrender more to God. And the imagery that came to me at one point was um, there is it was two images actually. It was there is always this music and dance that God is providing in any particular moment. Not necessarily literally, but like metaphysically, maybe. And the goal in regards to surrender is to tune yourself into the music that he is playing and then allow him to lead the dance. Now, the tricky part is if you don't trust what the next step is, you're going to try to take lead in this particular dance and you're going to start stepping on toes. And there's forgiveness there for sure, but man, stuff just goes way better when you choose to surrender. The other imagery that came to mind was all of reality is essentially like this giant loom, and God is the weaver that's weaving the fabric of existence together. And every thread is us, and every thread is like a thought or an action that we might partake in. And if we just surrender and follow his guidance, the loom starts weaving together this beautiful tapestry that makes sense. However, one can choose to just white knuckle life and shovel his way through the middle of that tapestry, and he or she may achieve success, whatever success looks like to them. But man, it's white knuckling life, and that's exhausting, and also doesn't make sense when you look at the tapestry that's being made. And so this idea of surrendering to my God, because he knows what's going on and has a plan, and if I can figure out how to do that and do that well in every moment, life might not turn out the way I expected or anticipated, but it will be according to a plan, and it will be the best. But man, that surrender piece is tricky.
Absolutely. But yet such a powerful concept because these words that we have these connotations that we apply to them. But when you really dig into the word and how you're using it, you can reframe it and make it beneficial for your life. And man, that reframing that word and then using it spiritually in the way that you're focusing on another reflection that's worth digging into more. Brother, as always, I could talk to you forever. This was
Dude,
incredible.
this was so much fun, man. I'm grateful for you and the opportunity you gave me. Yeah, this hour and a half went by quick. It was so much fun.
Yes, it did. Complete honor, man. I will be linking your current books in the podcast, your Instagram account, and of course, all the cool things you're doing, Machine Mentality, and that fantastic website. Happy to call you a friend, brother. Can't wait to talk to you soon.
Dude, I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely.
All right, brother.
Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action. Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.